Clumsy girl, Belmont sneered, but the insult was aimed like a dart at Vance, her fiancé. She watched him. That flicker of something, damn it. Era Hayes, just a waitress, about to be a sacrifice. The gala shimmered, oblivious. Tonight, chess. Serafina's game. But here's the thing. Serafina's investigator missed something crucial. Ara's beige life hid a secret sharper than any Belmont diamond. 20 years, vanished brilliance. The audience thinks it's a game, a bit of cruel fun. They don't know that under Ara's quiet surface sleeps a hurricane. They have no idea how her quiet kindness and that pawn, oh, that tiny pawn, will change everything. Clears throat. A move that would not only cost Serafina the game, but her entire future. The Argent Club was not a place for people. It was a place for names. Names like Vance, Sterling, and Belmont. These names were etched onto decades-old brass plaques, whispered in hushed tones over $500 glasses of scotch, and carried on the stiff, scented air. And then there was Ara Hayes. Ara was not a name. She was a function. She was the hand that refilled the crystal water glass, the shadow that cleared the silver plates, the quiet apology when a shoulder was bumped by a laughing CEO. At 24, her life was a study in beige, a tiny walk-up apartment in the village, a mountain of debt left by a ghost. And this job, serving the people who lived in the sky. She was good at it. She was invisible. She anticipated a need before it was spoken. She could navigate the dining room floor during the peak Saturday rush with the grace of a phantom. Her heavy tray of steaks and lobster balanced as if it were weightless. Tonight was the annual Argent Gala, a night where the club's members outglittered each other. The air was thick with the scent of Chanel No. 5 and expensive cigars. Ara was assigned to the main banquet table, Table 1, the royal table. There sat Serafina Belmont. Serafina was the undisputed queen of this world. Her family didn't just have money. They were money printed on the very first presses of New York finance. She was sharp, beautiful in a cold, angular way, and wore the famous Belmont sapphire around her neck as casually as Alara wore her bistro apron. And next to her sat Julian Vance. Julian was the reason Serafina was particularly radiant and particularly venomous tonight. He was her fiancé, heir to the Vance shipping empire. Julian was different. Where Serafina was sharp, he was solid. Where she was cutting, he was quiet. He had kind eyes, and he was the only person at table 1 who had looked at and said, "Thank you, Ms. Hayes," when she refilled his water. He hadn't just glanced. He had looked. And in that 1-second glance, Ara felt a spark of warmth she hadn't felt in years. Serafina, who missed nothing, saw it. She watched Ara move to the other side of the table. She watched Julian's eyes follow her. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible tracking, but to Serafina, it was a siren. "Darling," Serafina said, placing a manicured hand on Julian's arm, her voice loud enough to cut through the chatter. "Are you fascinated by the help?" Julian stiffened. "I was just admiring her efficiency, Serafina. She's very professional." "Efficiency," Serafina repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, I suppose she is." Later, as Alara was clearing the dessert plates, Serafina's friend Victoria Sterling leaned back in her chair, laughing too loudly. Her elbow connected hard with Ara's tray. A silver fork clattered onto the marble floor. "Oh my goodness," Victoria gasped, feigning shock. "You clumsy girl. Look at this." Ara froze. "My apologies, Miss Sterling. She's so clumsy," Serafina chimed in, a predator's smile playing on her lips. She looked directly at Julian. "It's tragic, really. Some people just aren't built for refinement." Ara bent to pick up the fork, her cheeks burning. She could feel every eye at the table on her back, a physical weight of humiliation. "That's enough, Serafina," Julian said, his voice low but firm. "What? I'm just making an observation." Serafina turned her cold eyes on Alara, who was now standing straight, the offending fork in her gloved hand. "Be more careful, dear. Those forks are worth more than your apartment's rent." Ara locked her gaze on Serafina. For a split second, the invisible girl was gone. In her place was something hard, something ancient and cold. "Yes, Miss Belmont," she said, her voice perfectly even. "It won't happen again." She turned and walked away, but she could feel Serafina's stare like two ice picks in her back. The game hadn't started. Serafina hadn't even found the board yet, but she had found her opponent. Serafina Belmont was not used to being challenged, even by a look, and she was certainly not used to her fiancé defending the staff. She leaned over to her private investigator, Mr. Harrison, who was posing as a member of club security. "Harrison," she whispered, her smile never faltering. "The waitress Hayes. I want to know everything. I want to know where she buys her coffee. I want to know who she talks to. I want to know what her dirt is." Harrison nodded, melting back into the shadows. "Consider it done, Miss Belmont." Serafina took a sip of her champagne. She would crush this. She would find Ara's weakness and expose it to the world. She would remind Julian and everyone else exactly what a girl like Ara Hayes was. Nothing. 2 days later, a thick cream-colored envelope landed on Mr. Harrison's desk. It was full of the mundane details of Ara Hayes' life. Address 415B Thompson Street, debts 112450. Medical personal, known associates none. Hobbies. Serafina, reading the report in her penthouse, tapped her long fingernail on that last line. Harrison had followed Ara on her day off. Subject spent 3 hours in Washington Square Park. She did not meet anyone. She sat at the stone chess tables. She played 5 games against multiple opponents, including the local chess hustler, a man named Fast Eddie. Subject won all 5 games, in under 10 minutes each. Serafina read the line again. Chess. A slow, delighted smile spread across her face. It was perfect. It was exquisite. Chess was Serafina's game. She was the president of her collegiate chess club. Her father had taught her, just as his father had taught him. It was a game of pedigree, of intellect, of strategy. It was a game for Belmonts, not for waitresses. This little girl, this nothing, thought she was smart. She was playing chess in the park with vagrants. How quaint, how pathetic. Serafina would use this. She would use this to tear Ara apart, piece by piece, in front of the one man she seemed to be impressing. The plan formed instantly. The following week was the Vance family's annual winter solstice charity ball. It was the event of the season hosted at the family's sprawling Long Island estate, and as the future Mrs. Vance, Serafina was in charge of the evening's entertainment. She made a special request to the Argent Club's catering manager. Ara Hayes must be on the staff list for the event. The night of the ball, the Vance estate was a fortress of light and music. Snow dusted the manicured lawns. Inside, the grand ballroom was overflowing with the most powerful people in the country. Ara, her server's uniform feeling stiffer than usual, moved through the glittering crowd, her tray held high. She tried to find Julian just to know where he was, but the room was too dense. She just focused on her job. In, out, clear the glasses, offer the horderos. At 10 p.m., the Clear's Throat Orchestra quieted. Serafina Belmont, draped in a breathtaking gown of crimson silk, stepped up to the microphone on the ballroom's main stage. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice, amplified, silenced the room. "Thank you all for coming and for your incredible generosity to the Children's Hospital Fund." She paused, her eyes scanning the room, passing over ambassadors and senators until they found what they were looking for. They locked onto Ara, who was standing near the service entrance, holding a tray of empty champagne flutes. Ara's blood ran cold. "Tonight," Serafina continued, her voice dripping with faux charm, "we have some wonderful entertainment, but first I thought we might indulge in a little impromptu game, a display of intellect." A murmur went through the crowd. "It has come to my attention," Serafina said, "that we have a hidden prodigy among us." She was looking right at Ara. Julian, standing near the stage with his father, Charles Vance, frowned, confused. "I am, as many of you know, an avid chess player, and I heard a charming little rumor that one of the staff here tonight," she pointed, a diamond-encrusted finger singling out of the shadows, "fancies herself quite the strategist. Ms. Lara Hayes." Air stopped breathing. Every head in the ballroom swiveled towards her. The weight of 1,000 judgments pinned her to the spot. "Come, come," Serafina beckoned. "Don't be shy." 2 waiters, clearly in on the plan, wheeled out a small, ornate table with a beautiful hand-carved ivory chess set. They placed it in the center of the stage under the full hot glare of the spotlights. "What is Serafina doing?" Julian muttered to his father, starting to move forward. "Wait," Charles Vance said, his voice a low rumble. "Let's see the game." Ilara was trapped. The catering manager was already pushing her from behind. "Go on, girl. Don't make a scene. Just do what she says." Numbly, Ara walked toward the stage. Each step felt like walking through wet cement. The room was spinning. She could hear the whispers. "A waitress? Is she serious? It's a mockery. Serafina is so wicked. Poor girl. She's terrified." R mounted the small steps. Serafina was smiling, a picture of grace. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Welcome, Ara. We're all so excited to see you play." Serafina leaned in close enough that only Ara could hear her, her voice a venomous whisper. "I hear you're very good in the park. Let's see how you do against someone who actually matters." She sat down, gesturing for Ara to do the same. "You'll play white?" "Of course," Serafina said loud enough for the crowd. "Let's give you every advantage." This was the trap. Refusing would mean admitting fear and causing a scene, costing her the job. Playing and losing, which Serafina clearly expected, would mean public, permanent humiliation, branding her as a pretentious fraud in front of Julian and his entire world. Ara looked down at the board, the 64 squares, the little ivory kings and queens. She hadn't played a serious game in 6 years, not since the night her life ended. Her hands began to tremble. The tremor started in her fingers and spread, a humming vibration of pure cold terror that vibrated up her arms and settled in her stomach. For Ara Hayes, a chessboard was not a game. It was a graveyard. She looked at the white queen gleaming under the spotlight, and she didn't see a piece of ivory. She saw her father, Arthur Hayes. The name meant nothing to the billionaires in this room. But 20 years ago, in the hushed halls of chess championships, the name Arthur Hayes was magic. He was a prodigy, a grandmaster at 22. He didn't just play chess, he was chess. He saw patterns in the rain, gambits in the stock market, and endgames in the stars. He taught Lara to play before she could read. He would sit her on his knee in their modest book-filled apartment. "You see, Ellie," he'd whisper, his voice smelling of pipe tobacco and old paper. "The board is a story. The queen is your ambition. The knight is your cleverness. But the pawn is your soul. It's small, it looks weak, but it's the only one that can cross the entire board and become anything it wants." She adored him. She, Clear's throat, was his apprentice, his shadow. By the time she was 10, she was beating masters twice her age. But Arthur Hayes had a flaw. It was the same flaw that made him brilliant. He was a gambler, not with money at first, but with strategy. He despised textbook chess. He loved the wild, impossible, suicidal moves. His signature was a move so reckless it became known as the Hayes Gambit, a chaotic mid-game sacrifice of his own rook just to shatter the opponent's composure. It won him fame, and then it brought him ruin. He began chasing that same high in other places. High-stakes private games in Monaco, underground tournaments in Macau. He started gambling with their money, then with borrowed money. The night her life broke, Ara was 18. He had wagered everything, their apartment, her college fund, all of it, on a single game against a cold, ruthless Russian oligarch, and he used the Hayes Gambit. But the oligarch, a man named Mikhail Petrov, had studied him. He didn't flinch. He accepted the sacrifice, weathered the storm, and in 40 agonizing moves dismantled Arthur Hayes completely. They lost everything. Arthur Hayes shattered. The magic was gone. He became a ghost, haunted by the 64 squares, trading his genius for a bottle of cheap whiskey. The medical debts was drowning in weren't hers. They were for the series of specialists and clinics he'd been in and out of ever since. A man broken by the one thing he loved. Ara never played again. Not seriously. The games in the park. That was just her trying to feel the good part of her father, the man who taught her about the porn soul. But she never used his strategies. She never gambled. She played simple, boring defensive chess. Now sitting on this stage with Serafina Belmont staring at her with that carnivorous smile, Ara felt the walls of the past closing in. This was Monaco all over again. Clear's throat. A rich, arrogant opponent, a public spectacle, and a board that promised only ruin. Well, Serafina purred, it's your move, White. Don't be afraid. Era looked up. She saw Julian in the crowd. His face wasn't mocking. It was pained. He looked at her with a desperate empathy, as if he knew she was being tortured and was powerless to stop it. That look broke something in her. She had spent 6 years being invisible, paying for her father's sins, terrified of the very talent he had given her. She was hiding, letting ghosts and bullies define her. She looked at Serafina, then back at the board. The trembling in her hands didn't stop, but it changed. It was no longer fear, it was electricity. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Not the broken man, but the brilliant one. Clear his throat. Don't play their game, Ellie. Play yours. Make them see the board the way you see it. Era reached out her hand. The tremors ceased. Her fingers were perfectly steady. She closed her eyes for 1 second, took a deep breath, and opened them. The fear was gone. The waitress was gone. A grandmaster's daughter sat in her place. Her hand closed around the king's pawn. With a sharp, definitive click, she moved it forward 2 spaces. Ahoy, the most aggressive, confident opening in the game. Serafina's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. She had expected a timid pawn push, a frightened defensive move. She recovered quickly, responding with her own pawn. C5, the Sicilian defense. A sharp, combative reply. The game was on. The clear-throat air in the ballroom thickened. The initial buzz of gossiping whispers faded into a dense, watchful silence. This was no longer just a prank. It was a duel. Serafina, for her part, was a good player, a textbook player. She had been trained by expensive tutors, her mind filled with the classical openings and defenses of the Ivy League School of Chess. She played the Rue Lopez, the Spanish torture, an opening designed to slowly, methodically apply pressure until the opponent cracks. Her moves were precise, practiced, and utterly predictable. Knight to f3, bishop to b5. She was building a perfect, symmetrical fortress, her pieces developing exactly as the masters dictated. Era played defense, but it wasn't the timid, cowering defense Serafina had expected. It was a hedgehog defense, a tight, coiled, patient formation. She made small, quiet pawn moves, developing her knights behind them, her pieces looking less like an army and more like a family, huddled together for warmth. To the untrained eye, Era was being crushed. "She's just defending," Victoria Sterling whispered to a man beside her. "Serafina has her pinned. This will be over in 10 moves." Serafina certainly thought so. She leaned back in her chair, a portrait of casual dominance. She would move a piece, then examine her fingernails. She cast her knight aggressively into Ara's territory, attacking a pawn. "Oh dear," Serafina said loud enough for the first few rows. "A hanging pawn. You must protect your pieces, Ara. They're all you have." Ara didn't look up. She simply defended the pawn, her expression unreadable. Julian Vance watched, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. He didn't know chess, not really, but he knew people. He knew Serafina was playing to the crowd, her moves arrogant and flashy. And he saw Ara. She wasn't playing Serafina at all. She was just playing the board. She was in a different world, a bubble of pure, terrifying focus. 10 moves in, Serafina controlled the entire center of the board. Her bishops rad across the long diagonals. Her knights were aggressively posted. Ara was cramped, pushed back to her first 3 ranks. "It's a slaughter," someone murmured. Serafina, buoyed by the crowd's assessment, decided to go for the kill. She saw a way to win Ara's rook. It was a simple 3-move combination. It was greedy, it was obvious, and it required her to move her queen away from the defense of her king. She's so arrogant, Ara thought, a flicker of her father's fire igniting in her chest. She's developed her army, but they aren't talking to each other. They're just posturing. Clears throat. Serafina moved her queen. It was a direct attack, a brute force assault. The crowd gasped, seeing the brilliance of the attack. Ara looked at the move. She looked at Serafina's smug, triumphant face, and then she saw it. Not a defense, not an escape. She saw the ghost of the Hayes gambit. Serafina's move wasn't just aggressive, it was a fatal overextension. Her queen was now on the other side of the board, beautiful and powerful, but completely cut off from her king, who was still huddled in the center, undefended. Era's pulse quickened. The pawn is your soul, Ellie. Sometimes you have to offer it up. She didn't defend. She didn't retreat. She attacked. She pushed a pawn, a small, insignificant pawn, into the center of Serafina's fortress. Dear wife, it was a poisoned pawn. Serafina literally laughed, a short, sharp, barking laugh. Are you kidding me? She whispered. The girl was blundering. In her desperation, she was giving away pieces. Serafina captured the pawn instantly. XD5. The crowd buzzed. She'd lost a pawn for nothing. It was the beginning of the end. Era's hand moved again almost instantly. Knight to F6. This knight, which had been sleeping, sprang to life, attacking the pawn Serafina had just moved. Serafina, annoyed, defended the pawn. Ara moved her other knight. C6. Suddenly, Era's pieces weren't huddling. They were uncoiling like a spring. A few real chess players in the room, including Julian's father, Charles Vons, leaned forward. Charles wasn't a master, but he was a strategist. He saw what was happening. Ara hadn't been defending. She had been building tension, and Serafina, in her greed, had just pulled the pin on the grenade. She's opening the center, Charles murmured to Julian while Serafina's queen is on vacation. Is that what good? Julian asked. It's terrifying, Charles replied. Serafina's smile was gone. Her brow was furrowed. This wasn't the simple cowering game she had planned. Her attack had fizzled, and now's pieces were pouring into the space she had abandoned. Ara's bishop slid out. Her queen connected with her rook. In 5 moves, her cramped position had transformed into a perfectly coordinated, mobilized army, aimed directly at Serafina's exposed king and Serafina's most powerful piece. Her queen was on the wrong side of the world, watching, useless. The atmosphere on stage had changed. The hunter had become the hunted. Serafina Belmont was sweating. It wasn't a polite, aristocratic glow. It was a cold, panicked sweat that gathered on her brow and at the nape of her neck. The crimson silk of her dress suddenly felt like a straitjacket. The board in front of her was a nightmare. It had been 20 moves of her textbook strategy crumbling into dust. Every correct move she made was met by an unconventional, startlingly precise reply from Ara. The waitress wasn't just reacting. She was dictating the entire flow of the game. Clear's throat. The whispers in the crowd had changed. The snickers aimed at Ara were gone, replaced by murmurs of shock and confusion aimed at Serafina. What is happening? Why did her bishop move there? It looks trapped. It's not trapped. A deep voice cut through the whispers. It was Grigory of Enkov, a legendary reclusive Russian grandmaster who was in attendance. It is a sacrifice, my God. It is a sacrifice. Serafina had just trapped Ara's bishop. Ara could save it, but it would mean retreating and losing all her momentum. Ara looked at her trapped bishop. Then she looked at Serafina. Serafina was vibrating with tension. Clear's throat. She was desperate to recapture the control she'd lost. She needed to take that bishop. It was a sign that she was still winning, that the waitress had finally made a mistake. Feed them poison? Her Clear's throat father's voice whispered. Ara ignored the bishop. She didn't save it. She didn't retreat. She picked up her rook, the one her father had always gambled with, and slid it calmly to the center of the board. Rook to D8. The move was a thunderclap. It offered no defense. It made no sense. It was a direct suicidal-looking challenge. Serafina stared at the board, her mind racing. It's a bluff. She's a waitress from the park. She doesn't know theory. She's cracking. She blundered. She left her bishop to die, and now her rook is exposed. A bold move, Serafina said, her voice a strained imitation of her earlier confidence. But a foolish one. With a shaking hand, Serafina captured the bishop. Check. She had taken a major piece. She was winning. The crowd clapped politely, though the applause was thin and uncertain. Ara's response was instant. She moved her king 1 square. Now it was Serafina's turn again. She had the material advantage. All she had to do was consolidate, trade pieces, and win the endgame. Clear's throat. She looked for a safe square for her queen, which was still wandering aimlessly. But there were no safe squares. Heir's illogical rook move had cut off all the escape routes. Every piece Alara had, her knights, her other bishop, her pawns, was now part of a suffocating net. Serafina's pieces were in each other's way. Her king was trapped behind his own pawns, a prisoner in his own castle. Serafina realized the terrifying truth. The bishop she had just taken wasn't a blunder. It was bait. Ara had given up a bishop just to force Serafina's attacking piece onto a specific square, a square where it blocked her own king's escape. She trapped herself. Julian breathed, understanding dawning. No, his father corrected, his eyes wide with awe. Era corralled her like a wolf. She's been forcing her into this exact corner since the 10th move. Serafina looked for a way out. There was none. She had to move a pawn to create an escape route for her king. It was a desperate, ugly, time-wasting move. She pushed the pawn. The room was so quiet. The click of the piece on the wood sounded like a gunshot. Now it was Aura's move. She had Serafina exactly where she wanted her. The position was set. The trap was sprung. The past and present were colliding on this 64-square battlefield. This was no longer just a game. It was an execution. Era felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. She was no longer Ara Hayes, the waitress. She was Arthur Hayes' daughter, and she was about to finish the game her father never could. She wasn't just playing to win. She was playing to immortalize the loss. She was playing to create a study, a game so brutal and so beautiful that it would be talked about for years. She looked up for the first time and met Serafina's panicked eyes. Era's expression was blank, but her eyes were burning. "Your move," Serafina whispered, her voice cracking. Era's hand hovered over the board. She had a simple, clean win in 3 moves, but that wasn't enough. Not for what Serafina had done. She needed to show her and everyone in this room the difference between playing by the book and writing it. She picked up her queen. Time stopped. Every person in that grand ballroom was focused on the hand of the waitress, the hand that held the most powerful piece on the board. Alara's face was a mask of pure concentration, as if she and Serafina were the only 2 people on earth. Serafina saw the queen. She was trapped, yes, but her position was still defensible. As long as played the obvious moves, Serafina could fight, could draw the game out, could save face. She would still lose, but it wouldn't be a massacre. Era Hayes did not play the obvious move. She took her queen, the gleaming ivory piece, and slid it forward. Not to safety, not to attack. She placed it directly in the line of fire. Queen to G3. It was an undefended square. It was a blatant, insane, undeniable blunder. A full queen sacrifice. A collective strangled gasp erupted from the crowd. Julian's father, Charles, physically stood up. Grigory Ivanchov, the grandmaster, let out a sharp net of disbelief. Serafina Belmont froze. Her mind, which had been racing, went completely blank. It was a system crash. The move was impossible. It computed as error. Error does not compute. She laughed. It wasn't a laugh of mirth. It was a broken, hysterical, clear's throat, gasping sound. "You're desperate," Serafina hissed, her voice trembling. You're a fool. You're giving me your queen. You're giving up." She looked at Ara, expecting to see tears, to see the realization of her catastrophic mistake. Ara's expression was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. Serafina looked back at the board. "Take the queen. Take the queen. It's the only move." With a hand that shook so badly she could barely hold the piece, Serafina moved her rook and captured Ara's queen. RxG3. "Well," Serafina said, trying to regain her composure, her voice cracking, "that was anticlimactic. You lose." She sat back. The captured queen clutched in her fist. She had won. The waitress had choked. Air did not flinch. She did not concede. Her hand moved to her knight, the one that had been quietly waiting on the F6 square. She moved it. Knight to F3. "Check," Ara said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the ballroom like a diamond. Serafina stared. The knight was checking her king, but it was also defended by a bishop she hadn't seen. She couldn't capture the knight. And because of the rook she had just moved to capture the blundered queen, her king's only escape square was blocked, except for one. Her king was forced to move to the H1 square, the corner, the coffin. Clear's throat. Fine, Serafina snapped, sliding her king into the corner. KH1, she was still winning. She had an extra queen. This was just a spite check, a final pathetic gesture before the end. Hayes looked up from the board past Serafina and found Julian in the crowd. She held his gaze for a single heartbreaking second. It was a look that said, "This is for me, this is for my father, this is for all of it." Then she looked back at Serafina. Her hand moved to her other knight, the one on D4. With a final elegant, lethal click, she moved it. Knight to D2. Checkmate, Ara said. Silence. A thick, absolute, stunned silence. Serafina Belmont didn't move. She was staring at the board, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. It wasn't possible. She had a queen. She had rooks. She had everything. R's knight on F3 was blocking her king's escape, and the knight on D2, it was checking him. He was trapped. Trapped by his own pawns. Trapped by the rook she had just used to capture the queen. He was suffocated. Buried alive by his own pieces. It was a smothered mate. A full 100% intentional queen sacrifice. For a smothered mate, it was a chess problem. A theoretical impossibility. A legend from 19th century coffee houses. It was not something that happened in real life. It was not something a waitress did to a Belmont in front of 500 people. My God, Grandmaster Ivankov whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. It's a masterpiece. It's the Hayes Gambit, but perfected. Serafina began to shake her head, her multi-million-dollar diamond earrings trembling. No, that's not. You cheated. The game is over, Miss Belmont, Era said, her voice soft but final. She quietly stood up from the table. The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the silk of her apron rustling. Then one person began to clap. It was Charles Vance. He was on his feet, his applause slow, rhythmic, and booming. Then Julian joined him. Then Gregory Ivankov. And within 3 seconds, the entire ballroom, the senators, the CEOs, the old money aristocrats erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. They weren't clapping for a waitress. They were clapping for a genius. Serafina Belmont sat alone on the stage, frozen, surrounded by the ruins of her arrogance. The captured queen still clutched in her hand like a useless stone. The click of the knight on D2 was the only sound in a world that had suddenly violently gone silent. It was not a loud noise, but in the vacuum of the grand ballroom, it felt as deafening as a slamming prison door. Checkmate. Aura's voice, though barely a whisper, carried to every corner. Serafina Belmont did not move. Her mind, a precision instrument trained on predictable Ivy League strategies, had crashed. It was desperately trying to find a rebuttal, an escape, a flaw in the logic. But there was none. She stared at the board, her eyes wide and blank. She saw her king, the proud ivory monarch, trapped in the corner. She saw her own pawn, her own rook, her own pieces forming the walls of his tomb. A tomb that Arara's 2 small, insignificant knights had sealed. She had an extra queen, an entire all-powerful queen sitting uselessly on the side of the board. She had been given the world, and in exchange she had lost everything. A single hysterical sound, half laugh, half sob, tore from her throat. No. She looked up at Lara, her beautiful face so carefully composed, shattering into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. No, you didn't. The game is over, Miss Belmont, Ara said, her voice shaking now that the icy calm of the game had receded. The game is over when I say it's over. Serafina shrieked, and with a violent sweeping motion of her arm, she cleared the board. Ivory pieces flew across the stage, skittering and clattering onto the polished marble floor. The white queen she had captured, the one clutched in her hand, she threw directly at Era's face. Era flinched and the piece struck her shoulder, falling harmlessly to her lap. The entire ballroom gasped. This was no longer a game. This was assault. You cheat, Serafina screamed, rising to her feet, her crimson dress twisting around her. You're a street hustler, a nobody. You think you can come in here and humiliate me? Julian Vance was already moving, But his father, Charles, was faster. With a sharp, imperceptible gesture, Charles Vance signaled the two private security guards by the main door. "Miss Belmont." Charles's voice was not loud, but it was an iron rod of command that cut through Serafina's hysteria. "You are unwell. You are creating a scene." "She's the one who created the scene," Clear's throat. Serafina pointed a trembling diamond-encrusted finger as she planned this. This was a setup. "Julian, darling, tell them. Tell them what this waitress did." Julian had reached the foot of the stage. He looked up, not at his fiancée, but at Ara. His face was a pale, stunned canvas of horror, respect, and a terrible dawning clarity. "Serafina," he said, his voice flat. "Stop. Just stop. Stop. Don't you dare defend her." The security guards were now on the stage flanking her. They were large men, polite but immovable. "Mom, we need you to come with us. Get your hands off me," Serafina shrieked, slapping one of the guards' arms. "Don't you know who I am? I am a Belmont. I will have your jobs. I will have all of your jobs." She looked desperately at the crowd, at her friends, at Victoria Sterling, looking for an ally, but she found none. The faces that had adored her, feared her, and envied her hours before were now universally cold. They were masks of shock, disgust, and worst of all, pity. She hadn't just lost a game. She had lost her audience. She had violated the primary rule of their class. She had lost control. Ara, meanwhile, was trying to slip away. The adrenaline was gone, and in its place was the cold, hollow terror of the waitress, who had just broken the most expensive piece of crystal in the room. Clear's throat. She wanted her coat. She wanted her tiny apartment. She wanted to disappear. She backed away off the stage and bumped into a wall of people. The crowd wasn't parting for her. They were staring, blocking her exit. There she is. Serafina, seeing Ara trying to flee, broke free from the guard's grasp. She lunged, her face contorted. "You nothing. You think you can just walk away?" She raised her hand, her heavy diamond rings glinting, to strike Alara across the face. The slap never landed. Julian Vance caught her wrist in midair. His grip was absolute. The entire room, which had been buzzing, went dead silent again. This was the real checkmate. Serafina stared at his hand on her wrist, then at his face, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Julian, you're hurting me." "No," Julian said, his voice so cold it seemed to drop the temperature of the room. "I'm stopping you." He let go of her wrist, pushing it away from him as if it was something unclean. "You were right about one thing tonight, Serafina," he said, his voice clear and caring. "It is tragic when some people aren't built for refinement." Serafina's face crumpled. The fury, the arrogance, the power, it all evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, terrified 25-year-old girl who had just lost everything. "Julian, no, don't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It was just a game, a joke. I love you." "No," Julian said, shaking his head. He finally looked away from Ara and met Serafina's gaze. "You love the idea of me. You love the name. You love winning. But you just showed everyone here that you have no idea what to do when you lose." He turned his back on her. That was the final blow. Serafina Belmont didn't just crack, she shattered. A low, animalistic wail of despair came from her, and she finally utterly collapsed. The security guards didn't have to fight her. They simply lifted her by the arms, a human ruin in a crimson dress, and carried her out of the ballroom, her sobs echoing off the marble. The hard karma had hit. It wasn't just a loss. It was a public, social, and romantic execution. The room was silent for a beat, and then a new sound began. It was one person clapping, slow, rhythmic, and intentional. R turned. It was Grandmaster Grigory Ivankov. He was on his feet, his old stern face, a light with a fiery, profound respect. Then Charles Vance joined him, his own applause a booming strategic approval. And then the entire room, the senators, the ambassadors, the billionaires erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a standing, thundering, roaring ovation. It washed over Ara, a wave of heat and sound that rooted her to the spot. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking violently. She had been paying her father's debts, living in his shadow, terrified of the game that had broken him. And in one night, that same game had given her everything. Ms. Hayes. Ivankov was in front of her. He had pushed through the crowd, his eyes magnified by his thick glasses boring into hers. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply stared as if he were looking at a ghost. "I have seen that game once before," he said, his Russian accent thick with emotion, "but only in theory, in a notebook full of poetry. A notebook I believe was lost to the world." He paused and his next words changed her life. "You are Arthur Hayes's daughter." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Air's composure, the one she had held on to for 6 long, invisible years, finally broke. The tears she had refused to shed at her father's bedside, the tears she had choked back while cleaning up after the rich, they all came at once. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking. He was my father." "Was?" Ivankov shook his head. "He is in you. He died." She sobbed, the words tumbling out. "He died broke and in debt, and everyone called him a failure. They called him reckless. He lost everything to a man named Petro." Ivankov's face softened, but his eyes burned. "Mikhail Petro. Yes, a man who plays chess like an accountant. All numbers and no soul. I know him, and I knew your father. I was his rival, and I was one of the men who called him reckless." The Grandmaster looked down, a shadow of ancient shame crossing his features. "I was jealous. He was a poet in a world of mathematicians. He saw connections we couldn't. He saw the soul of the porn. He saw that." He gestured back to the stage, to the scattered pieces. "The Sleeping Knight's Revenge." R's head snapped up. "How? How did you know that name?" "It was the title of the study," Ivankov said. "Study 34B from his lost notebooks. A full queen sacrifice to force a smothered mate. Most masters believe it is a myth, a theoretical impossibility. I have been searching for those notebooks for 20 years. Where are they?" Era looked at the old man, the truth dawning on her, the twist of her life, the secret she never even knew she held. There are no notebooks," she said, her voice shaking. He taught it to me. When I was 8, he made me practice it for a week over and over. He said, 'The queen is your ambition, Ellie, but the knight is your cleverness. Never be afraid to sacrifice one for the other.'" I remembered. Ivankov's mouth fell open. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You don't have the notebook. You are the notebook. My God, child, you are a living legacy." He fumbled in his jacket, pulling out a pen and a business card. "I run the Ivan Chess Academy. I train champions. I was going to offer you a job as a strategist, a teacher. But that is an insult." He scribbled on the back of the card. It was a phone number, a private number. "I am not offering you a job," he said, his voice full of a new urgent purpose. "I am offering you a sponsorship. I want you to play. I want to train you to unleash all of his theories. We will not just restore the Hayes name, we will make it immortal." He pressed the card into her hand. "That $112,000 in medical debt. Consider it paid. A welcoming bonus. You will be the next world champion, Ms. Hayes. That is your destiny." Era stared at the card. The number paid. The debt that had been a stone in her stomach for 6 years gone. Her future, a blank, terrifying beige wall, had just been painted in the most brilliant colors imaginable. "Ms. Hayes," a second voice. She looked up. Charles Vance was standing beside Ivankov. His face was appreciative, like a scientist who had just discovered a new element. "That was the single greatest display of strategic sacrifice I have ever witnessed." He said, "Gregory will make you a champion. I will make you wealthy. The kind of mind that can see 10 moves ahead on a board like that. It has applications far beyond these silly games. My venture capital firm could use a mind like yours." He too offered a card. Legacy, power, wealth. It was all swirling around her, a vortex of possibility. "Father Gregory, please." Julian stepped forward gently but firmly, putting himself between Ara and the two powerful men. He looked humbled, his eyes roar. Can you both give her a second to breathe? He asked. He turned to Ara and the confidence of the Vance heir was gone. In his place was just a man looking at a woman he had profoundly misjudged. Ara, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her name without the Ms. I have no words. I'm sorry for what you did, for my part in it, for all of it. I don't have a sponsorship to offer, and I don't want to talk about business. He took a shaky breath. I saw you tonight, and I would be truly deeply honored if you would let me buy you a cup of coffee tomorrow or the next day. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with no stages and no crowds. I just want to hear your story. Ara looked at the three men. Avance, offering her father's past as a brilliant future. Charles offering her a new world of power, and Julian offering her a cup of coffee, offering her a chance to just be herself. She thought of the porn, the clear's throat, small, weak piece that could cross the entire board and become anything. She carefully, reverently pocketed Ivankov's card. It would be an honor to speak with you, Mr. Ivankov. I will call you tomorrow. Ivankov nodded, his eyes bright. Arthur would be so proud. She then looked at Charles Vance and took his card as well. Thank you, Mr. Vance. I'm sure our paths will cross again. Charles smiled, a rare, genuine smile. I have no doubt, Miss Hayes. Finally, she looked at Julian. The noise of the crowd, the shock of the night, the weight of her past, it all faded away until it was just him. Just his kind eyes, which had seen her when she was invisible. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ara Hayes smiled, a real warm, clear's throat, genuine smile. Coffee sounds perfect, Julian, she said. She didn't wait for him. She didn't wait for anyone. She turned and she began to walk. The crowd parted for her, a sea of admiring, stunned faces. She walked past the service entrance, her old life, her old apron. She walked straight through the grand ballroom, her head held high, her steps sure. She walked out of the massive front doors into the cold, clean winter air. The snow had stopped. The city was quiet. She took a deep breath. The first breath of her new life. She was not a waitress. She was not her father's debt. She was Ara Hayes, and her game was just beginning. And just like that, with one impossible move, Ara's life changed forever. She didn't just win a game of chess. She reclaimed her name, honored her father's memory, and captured the heart of the one man who saw her when she was invisible. Serafina wanted to show the world that Ara was a nobody, but she only proved that true queens aren't defined by their money or their status, but by their courage and their brilliance. What did you think of Ara's revenge? Was Serafina's public humiliation deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. This story is a powerful reminder that you should never ever underestimate the person standing in the shadows. If you love this story, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and be sure to subscribe and turn on all notifications so you never miss another story of justice and triumph. Thank you for listening. Thank you for